Hey everyone, welcome back to another video, and I know this title is probably going to seem a little confusing, especially for anybody who's been paying attention to what Apple's done with the iPads in the past few weeks, but I stand by what I said. Apple needs to refocus the iPad. Even with the new M2 iPad Pro and the new base model iPad and all the accessories and the release of iPadOS 16, there are issues, and today we're going to talk about them. So let's get started.
And we call it the iPad.
So like I said, a lot of people are probably going to be confused because Apple has recently released a bunch of new iPads as well as a brand new version of iPadOS. And this version of iPadOS was the biggest one, at least in my opinion, that we have gotten so far. It gives us full screen capabilities where we can actually have two displays on supported iPads. We can also now have windows, courtesy of Stage Manager, and there are a ton of other features added that are under the hood features. But the problem that I have with this is that with each version of iPadOS that has come out, it's become more and more of an identity crisis because Apple both wants to continue to treat the iPad like it has for years, while also catering to us nerds and power users who want to use it in totally different ways that the iPad, in all honesty, was never originally intended for. Here's what I mean. Back in the day when Apple had their original lineup of iPads, and no, before you ask, I don't want them to go back to this, but it was essentially a blown-up iPhone with more capabilities. And the benefit to this was that the people who didn't really want to deal with the complexities of a desktop computer could do pretty much everything, and especially later on in the lineup, everything you would normally do on your computer. However, it was done in a different way, and the common term for this, which basically became the catchphrase for the iPad, was alternative workflows. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But the point is that back in the day when you bought an iPad, it was so that you could complete these more complex tasks that you would normally do on a computer in a much simpler way, but a different way, on a touchscreen-based device that generally allowed you to take it on the go, just like a laptop, give you better battery life than a laptop, and potentially give you comparable performance or enough performance to get the job done. But of course, even with the ability to do all these things in a different way, people who were more outspoken, like us nerds, were not happy with the fact that we had to adjust our workflow to make an iPad into our daily driven laptop. However, for the people who understood that the iPad could still do all these things just in a different way, like myself, they adapted to it and were more than happy with completely replacing their entire laptop setup with a just as powerful but more portable option, which is what I've done with my iPad Pro. But with iPadOS taking over where iOS used to live on the iPads, the question then arises of how do you treat the iPads? Does it become more of a laptop alternative where you give it these features and begin to reintroduce the complexities that people originally moved to the iPad for to escape from on the original MacBooks? Or do you continue to honor and improve the original underpinnings of the simple alternate workflow design of the original iPads? Well, as far as I can tell, it seems like Apple is leaning towards the former, not the latter. And that is a double-edged sword in and of itself. Here's what I mean. If Apple were to take the core simplicity of the iPad and continue to improve on that, maybe giving us some basic functionality for file browsing or giving us some basic window management like split screen, you are still sticking to that core simple functionality that allows users, or forces them depending on your perspective, to use and complete all of the same software and tasks that they would have on their computer, just in an alternate way, an alternate workflow. You still have the hardcores, the power users, the extreme cases who will complain because they can't use a cursor or move around windows or use an external display. You still run into those issues. Alternatively, you could overcomplicate the iPad, make it into a laptop with windowed modes, multiple displays, and multiple open instances of Safari, which is something I ran into, and I'm tech savvy and I didn't realize I had like 10 Safari things open because there's no easy way to just sort of see it all. Anyway, The point is, you can go the other direction and overcomplicate the iPad, uprooting that simplistic core foundation for iPadOS and make it into exactly what it was originally designed to allow people to move away from for the sake of simplicity. And that comes with its own challenges. Challenges like making a piece of software that was never intended for that to do that. Multi-window, multi-display, all that kind of stuff. But it also then raises questions that I don't think Apple's really ready to answer. Like, for example, one of the big questions that has been around for a long time is, if Apple is throwing such powerful hardware as the M1 or M2 chip into an iPad Pro and still letting it run iPadOS, then why can't we run other pieces of software that were made with the M1 or M2 chip in mind, like Final Cut Pro or Logic Pro, or even things like a full, and I mean full, desktop like what you have in macOS. If you're going to keep the simplicity of the iPad somewhere in its foundations, but yet introduce all these complexities, you're just going to have a bunch of questions that you're not going to have answers for because you want to cater to both parties, and that's not going to happen. And you end up with this weird scenario that we're in currently where everyone is treating the bigger, higher-end iPads like computers except Apple. I mean, hell, even Blackmagic has ported DaVinci Resolve to the new iPad Pro, even though Apple, I guarantee you, has gotten tons of requests, both from users like me and multiple other professionals, begging them to move Final Cut onto the iPad Pro, but yet the best we get from them for video editing is iMovie. We have to make do with alternatives like LumaFusion, who is making the most of the power that these iPads have, but yet we don't have anything from Apple, despite them being the ones who designed the hardware, designed the software, and to really just rub salt in the wound, they optimized their applications for the M1 chip because the M1 chip was the first Apple Silicon chip on the market, meaning that that's the chip that has had the most time to be improved on when it comes to software utilization. And Final Cut would have been one of the first apps to really take full advantage of it. We don't have it on the iPad yet, but we have everything else. The point is, Apple needs to decide what they're going to focus the iPad on. Because with the new iPad 10th generation being introduced alongside an upgrade to the iPad Pro with the M2 chip, while also still having the iPad Air, the iPad Mini, and continuing to sell the 9th gen old school giant bezel home button iPad, the lineup is so wide, so spread out, so diverse, that the focus is almost impossible, but it needs to be done because now we have the question of, what is the iPad? Apple thought they were all clever with the what's a computer ad, but now we're asking, what is an iPad? Are you spending MacBook money and buying a MacBook alternative? Probably not, because there's so many underpinnings that make it into this super simplistic device with the slightest guise of added complexity. Or it's this super simple device for a college student or even a grandparent who just wants to browse Facebook, who can then unintentionally open 20 instances of their web browser and not even realize it, because you have these multi-app functions that are now implemented because the pros asked for it. At the end of the day, the iPad Pro is the best iPad that Apple has ever made, and the software is the biggest letdown to that piece of hardware. On the other hand, the iPad 9th generation is the best super simple iPad for the casual user on the go who simply wants a Facebook, web browser, and email machine. But it is let down again by the software because Apple wants to allow users to have these multi-window functions. They want these users to be able to split screen and open multiple instances and do all of these complex things. And it's available on a device that somebody with significantly less knowledge than the nerds and pros are going to have. So while I don't think it's going to happen, I think it needs to be said, Apple's focus on the iPad has been so terribly misguided, and I don't know if that's due to the hardware engineers going nuts with Apple's new hyper-efficient silicon, or the software engineers fighting amongst themselves wanting to appease the nerds and keep the core at its core simple, but something's got to change. And I don't upgrade my iPads that frequently, and I have an M1 iPad Pro because I broke the last iPad I had, and I wouldn't have upgraded if I hadn't. But honestly, I feel like if I'm going to keep a hold of my M1 iPad Pro for the years that these iPads last, something needs to be done. Apple needs to decide what they're going to do with these devices, and until then, it's always going to be a sidekick to my main macOS device, which is something I never wanted an iPad to be, because the iPad was supposed to complement it, be an alternative that allowed you to complete tasks away from the machine and then be just as efficient when sitting back down in front of the machine. But instead, it's something that I have to make an effort to use in any way other than its original intention. It's not pro enough, it's not simple enough, and I don't know what to make of it anymore. Sorry if this video got a little ranty, but I just felt like I needed to express my confusion and frustration by the fact that Apple's simple alternative workflow concept of the iPad has now been kind of clouded by the demands of the nerds to make it into this hyper-powerful, overly engineered, super capable laptop replacement. But it needs to be one or the other, and it can't be both. But I don't know. That's my opinion, and I wanted to express it here. Let me know what you all think in the comments. I'm actually curious to know. So leave a comment down below if you guys have any questions or have a comment. Obviously, it's a comment section. Also, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss some upcoming content. I've got my Apple Watch coming in hopefully at the end of this week. I know it's very, very late, so I'm going to completely miss the review cycle for the Apple Watch Ultra, but I bought one. I'm going to review it anyway because if I spent the money to do it, I might as well. And aside from that, hope you guys enjoyed this video talking about how the iPads are still beasts on chains. Either way, I'll see you all in the next video. Make sure to be there and have a good one.